All right, Elaine, should we get started?
Let's do it.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're calling in from. You are on a webinar from Auditoria called The Future of Finance Has Arrived, the 2020 State of Automation in the Finance Office Survey Results. My name is Nick Ezzo. I'm the VP of Marketing at Auditoria.
Hi, and I'm Elaine Nowak. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Auditoria.
And today we're going to have some fun. We're going to unveil the results of our 2022 survey. Elaine?
You want to do a little housekeeping? If people have questions?
Yeah, of course, thank you. So little housekeeping before we get started. There are some buttons at the bottom of your screen. If you want to ask a question, just type it in the Q&A. If you want to raise your hand and get the attention of a presenter like Elaine or myself, press the raise hand button. If you've accidentally raised the raise hand button and you want to unraise your hand, just press that button again. And you can always at any time chat with us using the chat button down below. So before we get started with the agenda, we did a survey for the third year in a row. The first year in 2020 during the pandemic, or actually right before the pandemic, we surveyed 200 people. Last year in 2021, we surveyed around 400 people. This year, we took the pulse of 650 finance professionals across the United States to get their ideas and their perspective on the state of automation of the back office. And today, we're going to unveil the results of that survey. Elaine, you want to walk us through the agenda?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about it. So we're going to sort of give you an overview of what we found out, the key findings from the survey. We're going to talk about the fact that we think automation is here to stay for the finance office. We're going to talk about repetitive work, how we think it's ruining corporate finance. We're going to talk a bit about time and why it's of the essence. And then the challenges that we unveiled in the finance office, and then the ability to embrace automation or, potentially stagnate. And then, of course, to be a little bit more practical, steps to get started on an automation journey.
All right. So, Elaine, do you want to give us the highlights of what we saw in this? I guess automation is no longer a nice to have, and corporate finance has to step up and embrace automation. But walk us through some of the highlights of the survey, please.
Sure. So I think at a very high level, the most manual process was accounts receivable. It once again led the way as having the most manual processes. Time spent checking and updating data was identified as the biggest challenge across the back office. Inaccurate or partially complete information and lack of responsiveness from employees and vendors or customers, that was the biggest daily pain points. And the activities that took up the most time for finance differed by role. CFOs stated it was analysis, VPs or directors, managers in finance said it was gathering data. And the finance specialist talked about executing audit and compliance related activities. And when we talked about priorities and asked the question, the two top priorities for the finance office was focus on process improvements, and that was followed by invest in new technologies or improve processes. So, and again, just to hit on those key findings, and I think we're going to be seeing these come up over and over again with some of the responses that we received. Most respondents, about 62%, they don't feel that their finance back office is sufficiently automated. Accounts payable and receivable were ranked as having the most manual work for the third year running. Time spent on manual or repetitive tasks was the biggest challenge, and that was followed closely by time spent checking and updating data. A lack of responsiveness from employees, vendors, customers, that was the most significant pain point. And 1/5 of the respondents, about 21%, said that they will implement advanced levels of analytics and reporting in the next year.
Well, that's interesting findings. Why don't we drill into some of the specifics on the actual data?
Yeah, so automation is here to stay. We'll hit on this topic. When we look at the automation aspects of the 30, the majority had basic levels or some automation, while the advanced or the autonomous levels were very small in comparison. What people had no automation in the finance back office, 16%. So I think that's some that's a pretty large percentage that has no automation, and there's people doing a lot of manual work.
Well, when I look at this graph and I look at those wedges up near the upper left, sort of that 10, 11, 12 o'clock, 9.8 are using some fairly advanced automation. 4.5 in the green are using advanced, and then 2.8% are completely autonomous. If you add all those three things up, and I'm not a math whiz, but that looks like about 17%. What that says to me is that there's a huge opportunity of the people who have no automation, basic levels, or some automation. So the finance back office, although there are some challenges, and we'll explore those in the next couple of slides, there's a really big opportunity here to implement automation in the finance back office.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think it's also of note, of interest, when we looked at this particular question, in which areas of finance do you use automation today? Even though we just talked about AP and AR having the most manual, it was also reported as being the most, it's the area that respondents said had the most automation. So why that seems contradictory, how do we interpret those responses? I mean, when we look at basic levels, right? So maybe they have some automation, but there's still tons and parts of AP and AR that really could use a technology uplift. And I think in an area that's really highly manual, it would make sense that those who are automating are going to automate areas like AP and AR. Your thoughts on this one, Nick?
Yeah, so if we think about like what we've automated in the last couple of decades, really, we went from spreadsheets to cloud-based budgeting and forecasting tools. It's like things like just taking the spreadsheet and making that more of a streamlined process. If you look at things like accounts payable, I think we've streamlined the approval process. Another way of saying is all the paper that moves around the finance office, we've automated that pushing of paper. Approvals process in purchasing, approvals process in payments. Some of the accounts receivable stuff has been automated, just the workflows and things like that. But to me, like this really presents an opportunity to automate that last mile, which is the communication. And I guess as we get further into this presentation, we'll explore some of those friction points. So it's not surprising to me that AP and AR have been the beneficiaries of automation. They are the largest functions within the accounting groups, but we're really only doing the paper pushing, automating the document approvals.
Yeah, and just one note on this slide, you can see that the numbers don't add up to 100%. And that's because this was one of these questions that was a select all. And so there are certain ones that got voted on more than once. So the most popular answers that said, where is automation used were AP and AR.
So that's interesting. So if somebody has more than one issue, they would select more than one box. So
Correct.
This actually gives us a pretty composite view of really what's going on in the back office.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the automation that is in place. It's primarily being used for analysis accordingly. So the question that we asked was, in which finance function do you have automation in place? And the functional area was creating reports and performing analysis. That was the most automated. And that was closely followed by processing invoices and payments. I think it's also of note to look at what was the area with the least amount of automation. It was performing collections activities. And this is an area, Nick, that I think could really benefit from automation, because there's a lot of great technology that's available to help collections teams, collect payments faster.
Yeah, it does seem kind of counterintuitive that if cash is king, cash is the lifeblood of the organization, cash is oxygen, all those cliches that we've heard a million times, why are we not spending more time and resource focusing on that 5.8% and trying to get that up to bring cash back into the organization faster? Now, what's not surprising to me is that reports and analytics are the number one thing, the tallest building in the neighborhood, if you will, here.
Yeah.
So that 17.6% of automation is in that area. So, but it does make sense, because I'll use a nautical analogy. If you're steering the ship and guiding the ship, you want to know what is your present direction, what's your course and speed, so you can make corrections if necessary. And so, because the decision maker in the finance function is typically the CFO, she or he would probably invest in tools that will help them guide the business, provide insights, see which direction they're in, and make those adjustments as quickly as possible. So again, the CFO, controller, FP&A people, they've been the beneficiaries of a lot of this technology. And I think that that's about to change as we start to implement more technologies around the collections and payments.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And now let's talk a bit about repetitive work and why it's ruining corporate finance. This particular question was on a daily basis. So that's on your day-to-day, and you have your teams working. What are your biggest pain points? And repetitive manual tasks, apparently it runs rampant in the corporate finance office. When we look at things like record keeping, right, that really translates into hours and hours that's spent inputting data into systems and then updating old records. And I think that when we think about AP and AR teams, they really have to keep an eye on things like trends and discrepancy in the data that they are collecting. When we look at the results here, about a fifth of the respondents said the daily pane was inaccurate or partially complete information from vendors and customers. Thoughts about this one, Nick?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it's very surprising that here we are in 2022, when with all the technology that's available today, people are still entering data manually, which is efficient, it's slow, it's error prone, it's just maddening. And then, but what we're hearing and what many of the folks on this webinar can probably back up is that external analyst firms, reputed analyst firms like Gartner, Forrester, IDC, and others are saying that in the next few years, data extraction will be a completely automated process. Once upon a time, data extraction was really hard. You could extract structured data from a tax form, for example, where box 1 is here and box 2 is here. Well, nowadays, with new technology that's really come on the horizon in the last 5 years or so, unstructured data can now be absorbed and consumed and injected within the ERP system. The bots, artificial intelligence and machine learning, they can figure out, is this an invoice? Where is the payment amount? Where is the payment date? Where's the payment terms? Where's the address? Where's the ACH number? What are the line items on this thing? So I think my first point on the data entry is around that.
Yeah. And I would also say, let's, looking at the data and looking at what this lack of responsiveness, I mean, communication is key for a lot of the finance processes, right? Whether it's sending the ad nauseum follow-up email to a client who's got an outstanding bill, or creating and sending receipts for paid transactions, right? Communication, this constant back and forth, it really consumes hours of valuable time. And when we look at the results, just over 20% of respondents indicated that a lack of responsiveness from employees, from vendors, from customers, that's the biggest pain point in the finance office. And more than 15% said that managing and taking action on the shared inbox was their biggest pain point. Does that surprise you?
In some degrees it does, in some ways it doesn't. It used to be, a couple of years ago, if you had an issue, you wanted to find out the status of a payment, or your customer owed you money, you'd pick up the phone. You pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, where's my money? Or whatever. But nowadays, everything has switched to email. And I've seen statistics and trends that say, although there are only 7 billion people on planet Earth, there's something like 200 billion emails that get exchanged every single day. And it's only going up and up and up. So, although the death of email has been predicted for years, it is not happening. And finance and accounting people, quite frankly, are drowning in these emails, with whether it's vendors asking for payment status, customers asking for copies of a purchase order or of an invoice. That inbox needs to be kind of tamed and managed. And my heart goes out to the folks who have to deal with that every day.
Yeah, and let's just talk a bit about more the communication piece and why that's a challenge, right? I think there's an inefficiency that's happening with the communication when I talked about these constant back and forth, and it's definitely a friction point for the finance teams. According to the survey, if I add up the numbers, right? So if I take the time spent at 6 to 10 hours and I look at the time, the wedge that says 10 to 30 hours, right? That's almost half of finance teams that are following up, seeking approvals, requesting documentation, and communicating with vendors, customers, and internal stakeholders. And that's in a week. That's a tremendous amount of time being spent on something that's super tedious and actually rather unrewarding in terms of tasks. And also looking at the data, on average, the majority of finance professionals spend at least one workday, right? 6 to 10 hours on communication. And I mean, unbelievably, 5%, right? That bright green wedge, a little bit more than 5%, right? Said they spend more than 30 hours a week, 30 hours a week on this kind of activity. That's almost the equivalent of a full-time employee spending their time on this kind of work that could easily be automated with advanced tech that's currently available.
And, Elaine, this survey kind of underscores in a very quantitative way something that we all knew anyway, which is that communication is a challenge. It's inefficient. It's slow. There's a back and forth. Sometimes meanings get lost, and sometimes people they're going on vacation, or time changes and things like that, time zones. So your survey results here actually quantified what I think we already know. But I couldn't agree with you more. That 5.4% that are spending more than 30 hours a week, those are people who are hating life right now. And,
Yeah.
I think there's some technology that's out there that could actually make their life a little bit better. So they don't have to go chasing down vendors, customers, and internal stakeholders every week.
Yeah, and given that, let's talk a little bit about time is of the essence, right? So time is a very valuable resource, commodity for the finance back office. And I think that this particular question, right? How much time does your team spend checking and validating back office work that's done by contractors or outsourced staff, right? So we hear over and over again that finance teams are understaffed, that the amount of work is overwhelming and very burdensome. So it's no surprise that they might be outsourcing. But then when you think about this, it's a maddening point, right? Checking other people's work. I mean, how much time is spent? More than a third spent more than 6 hours and even beyond 30 hours checking and validating work that was done by others.
Yeah, it's to me, this is a head scratcher. Like, who wants to wake up every morning and say, what I'm going to do today? I'm going to check somebody else's work to make sure that there's no errors. That, to me, that does not sound like a fun life. But if you just read the news from even the last couple of years, there are human errors that have caused significant losses for large companies because things were being done manually, whether in spreadsheets or in other places. There's a story about a very large drugstore chain that had to restate earnings to the tune of like $1 billion or more because of an error in the reporting. It was done on a spreadsheet. Or Tibco Software a few years ago overpaid by $100 million on an acquisition because of a spreadsheet error. So there are material errors that are out there. This is the thing that is like a horror movie for any finance and accounting person. Like, oh my gosh, there are monsters in my data. In this case, there are errors lurking under your bed. So this is one where I think this is a human problem that it's a problem that human beings try to handle themselves. And I don't think human beings are very good at catching errors. The last thing I'll say is this, if you think about the parts of our society that have been automated, like let's just take manufacturing as an example. Sure. Once upon a time, there were people their job was to stand at the conveyor belt and pick up the widget and say, okay, this is the right size and shape and weight. And, if it wasn't those things, then they'd throw it in the bin for all the bad parts, and the good parts would go forward. Today, they don't have human beings standing at conveyor belts. I mean, we like to think that, but it's all done by robotics, by lasers, by LiDAR, by advanced technology like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So really, technology is solving those defect problems in manufacturing. And I would make the argument that why couldn't we have technology solving the defect problem in finance and accounting?
I would take you up on that argument. So let's also talk about diving into a little bit more the detail and looking at this from a role-based perspective, right? So when we ask the question, what activities take up the most time for the finance office? And, when we think about finance professionals, they use a lot of spreadsheets, right, as their primary source of truth. And they're reviewing this work that's conducted by these outsourced professionals or junior team members. They're answering the deluge of emails in their inbox that's happening at any given moment. Time is really precious, right? That's a very limited resource if they're doing all of this kind of tedious manual work. So I think that this is a relatively, it's a revealing statistic that said that, when we look at this from an activities role-based lens, CFOs stated that analyzing data for reports took up the most of their time. When we looked at the mid to senior level professionals, right? So VPs, directors, managers in finance and accounting, they said gathering data for analysis, that took up most of their time. But when we looked at the junior accounting staff, the specialists, professionals in AP, AR, collections, treasury, they stated that executing audit and compliance related activities took up the most time. And it was the most mundane and repetitive task that they completed each day. So thoughts on this, Nick?
Yeah, I guess it kind of falls along the lines of what is your role. So if you're the chief financial officer, chief accounting officer, controller, you care about analyzing data and reports, and that's the activity that takes up most of your time. Now you go a level or two below that, and you've got the frontline, rank and file folks who are doing the data collection, trying to merge it together, normalize it, cleanse it. That's your VP, director, manager of finance and accounting. And if you think about those folks who are really on the front lines doing the dunning and collections and audit and compliance and all those other things, that's your kind of your junior people, on the totem pole. Now, if you ask me this, what does the CFO care about? The CFO does care about analytics and insights, because again, back to the nautical analogy, they're steering the ship, and they need to know what's our present course and speed, and what's our direction, and that's the thing that they care about. They don't. If you, I'm just saying here, if I was the CFO and you said, hey, look, the people are struggling to do data entry and error checking and stuff like that, the CFO would be like, not my problem. That's why I hired those people. But if you ask the finance specialists and professionals and even the folks above them, they would care very much about like, hey, how can I automate these routine, mundane tasks that are taking up the majority of my time? Because in the end, they all want to be able to provide that the insights and the guidance for the business. So that's my take on that, Elaine.
Yeah, and I would just add here, when we look at that the senior level, right, that's gathering the data and they're spending their time gathering data. I mean, they could flip that around. If they put technology in place, automation that collects that information for them, then they're going to spend less time gathering the data, and they can spend more time on other value-added tasks, maybe analyzing data for their own departments and the data that has to roll up to the executive level. So I think that that's a statistic that could really be turned around if you put automation in place. So let's talk a little bit about levels of automation. When we asked how many of your team's tasks are automated, the time that it takes for teams to complete the most fundamental and routine tasks is not surprising, when we look at the results and that what we collected from this question, right? So when they asked, the majority, almost 70%, said less than half of their tasks were automated. So when I look at the 25%, the 50%, that's where I'm talking about, almost 70%, that's less than half of it was automated. And I think the other statistic that jumps out at me, Nick, is just a little under 10% said none of their tasks were automated. So they're doing manual work. And that's just, doing that kind of manual work to complete your tasks, that kills productivity. And it lowers morale. And I think it really provides very little satisfaction when the day is done for those particular employees who are doing that kind of work manually.
Yeah, again, my heart goes out to them because, that 9.5% that says 0% of our tasks are automated. There's a couple things that that jump out at me for that. One is that, okay, of course, those folks are probably like not motivated and probably underappreciated, but also those companies, I think, are potentially doing their shareholders and owners a disservice, because when you're automating nothing, then that means that you're relying on human beings. And as we pointed out earlier, human beings can be inefficient, and we're not very good at catching errors, and things that could take a few seconds end up taking a few minutes or days or weeks. So I think that 9.5 does stick out to me like a sore thumb. The other one that sticks out to me is the green and the blue at the very bottom. I want to meet those folks. Like they're automating a ton of stuff in the back office. So I was like, okay, good on you guys. But kind of like the previous question that you'd asked earlier or reported on, there's a lot of possibility. There's a lot of white space out there for implementation of advanced automation in the finance office.
Yeah, agreed for that, for sure. So let's delve a little bit more detailed into the challenges in the finance office. At this point, I think between the conversation you and I are having, Nick, we've really kind of established some common themes that have really become apparent when considering the challenges faced by the finance office. And I would say that they are two things: time and data. Those are the biggest challenges, right? Time is a critical factor. And I think that the tasks that are taking up the most time are the manual and repetitive ones, especially according to this question and the responses that we saw. Doing work by hand, it's holding back the finance office. And as we discussed earlier, crucial time is being spent manually following up on a lack of responsiveness or updating inaccurate or partially complete data. So overall challenges, I see this theme, time and data, with the second and third most selected challenges being time spent checking, and updating data, and time spent extracting data from documents. So if it's taking that much time, I would say it's most likely being done manually. So the data points to the fact that it's time for the finance office to embrace automation and drastically change the way work gets done.
Yeah, I totally agree. You won't get an argument from me on that one, but it's funny because like the same challenges that we had 10 or 15 years ago are still the challenges that we have today. It's manual repetitive tasks. It's checking and updating data. It's extracting data from documents and invoices and forms and so on, and it's process things. So, the good news is we've got some technology that has arisen and been developed and refined in the last 5 years or so, primarily because of the rise of the smartphone. This device that we all carry around in our pocket that has more power in it than all of the computers around in 1960. You're literally carrying a mainframe supercomputer in your pocket. So the technology that has been implemented, where you can talk to your phone, you can talk to your home device, it understands you, natural language processing, natural language understanding, machine learning, artificial intelligence. I mean, we talk to our cars. So like that type of technology is here. It's become mainstream. And I think it's about time to help finance folks by implementing that technology in the finance office.
Yeah, and I would just say one more statistic to point out. Year over year, we ask this question, and every year, time spent on manual repetitive tasks is the #1 challenge, year over year. So for the past 3 years, it's been always the same answer, is the #1 challenge, and that's time spent on manual and repetitive tasks.
And Elaine, when we do this webinar in 5 years, I hope that's not the case.
I hope so, Nick. I hope that we can change the mindset of the finance back office and say, hey, we've got to do a little bit more to help you with your job and help you just live a better way of life.
All right. So since we talked about, some of the challenges in the finance office, what amazes me is here we are. It's June 28th, 2022. Inflation is on the rise. Prices are up. Gas prices are up. There could be a recession looming on the horizon. We don't know. But here we are, the headline of your slide is high balances and an accounts receivable challenge. Like this is one that kind of baffles me, Elaine. What did you say what did you think when you analyzed this data, and what kind of trends emerged as you looked at this?
Well, at this point in the survey, we wanted to kind of get a little bit more clarity into specific functional areas within the finance office, right? So we asked questions that were specific to certain parts of the finance office. So I think similar responses were provided at this departmental level, right? High accounts receivable balances, that's 19% top the list of the biggest challenges. And I think it's clear that a lot of help is still needed in this collections function, right? We talked about that collections had the least amount of automation. Almost 17% say they have insufficient tools to help them get their job done. And I think what's also surprising, Nick, and actually a little sad, almost 11% stated that they're processing paper checks as their biggest challenge. 11% still processing that percentage. I mean, how is that even possible in this day and age, that paper checks are still a thing that have to be contended with?
Yeah, I spoke to a lady last week at a conference, and one of her, she's having some work done on her house, and the person only accepted checks, and she had to go dig out her checkbook. She said, I haven't seen that checkbook in like 5 years. And so when you said that processing paper checks is like 10.7% of people responded that was their challenge. I'm like, really? Here we are. And by the way, I think this is a very US based issue. Other parts of the world are much more advanced than us in terms of wire transfer, ACH, and other electronic methods of sending money around. And even like here in the US, we've got, I think you mentioned earlier, we got Zelle, we've got PayPal, we've got Venmo, Cash App. It's amazing to me that in 2022, 10.7% of people said processing paper checks is their #1 problem.
Yeah, and I think another interesting thing to look at this slide, right? So we've had some slides or responses to questions where we have very small percentages and very large percentages. But when we look across the percentages here, we can really see that it's almost evenly distributed across these percentages. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's right. To me, it just means that there's I interpret that by saying there's not one thing that AR professionals are struggling with. They're struggling with a whole host of things. Bringing in money, they don't have the right tools. They don't have predictability. Hiring and retaining people is a problem. So to me, it means that they're in pain in a wide range of ways, and they absolutely need help. The last thing that sticks out to me is I kind of indicated this when we opened up the discussion on this one, Elaine. If we're poised to enter a recession or a downturn of any length, and hopefully it's a short and moderate one, I think that corporations today have to have their financial house in order, and that means that they have to have a handle on their AR balances, their DSO, and they have to have predictability on the cash that's coming in the door, because in reality, not every company weathers a financial downturn, and that's part of what happens. That's why, companies that are strong and that can adapt, they survive, and other ones fall by the wayside. So for me, this is a bit of a glaring siren, if you will, that we need to take a close look at and keep in mind as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So we also asked a question on the AP side of the house, right? We said regarding your vendor management, what are the challenges that you face? And the data input, continues to be a major challenge on that side of the house. More than a quarter, 27% of respondents noted that the manual input of vendor invoice data to the general ledger was the biggest challenge for the AP side of the house. Not far behind was responding to vendor inquiries. I mean, when we think about both of these functions, typically handled by the AP staff, right? Sorting through the AP inbox, manually extracting vendor data invoice, maybe slogging through countless emails to respond to the same type of question that gets asked over and over again, going back to this repetitiveness of the job or the work that's getting done. Inquiries such as, if I put this out there, right? Someone says, oh, what's the status of my invoice? What's the status of my payment? And so on and so forth, right? I think that there's a definite, this manual piece of this, and between the data and this inbox inquiries is, it's still very much a challenge for the AP side.
Well, yeah, and up till now, those types of tasks were not able to be automated. But as I mentioned earlier, with the the advancements of natural language processing and understanding, our devices can understand what we say, and in an email what we're asking for, and artificial intelligence based automation, advanced automation, can fulfill those wishes and solve those requests in a fraction of the time, in less than a minute, instead of waiting for the person to come back from vacation, or maybe the email is sent on a Saturday or Sunday. You got to wait till Monday morning to get a response. So I think these things have been historically issues, but again, when we do this survey webinar 5 years from now, Elaine, I'm hoping that this one has totally different responses, and that manual data input is no longer a vendor management challenge.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
You say, go ahead, Nick, your turn.
Well, I was going to point out that, because this is a challenge, this seems to indicate that it may be hard to attract and retain people within the finance office, right? So there's a lot of work that is just, it's not glamorous. It's sometimes it's tedious, sometimes it's dull, sometimes it's so repetitive that it's maddening. And so I think talent could be problematic for finance. So I'm setting you up, Elaine, to talk about the next slide.
Yes, because as a matter of fact, Nick, one of the questions that we asked on the survey, to what degree have you experienced challenges in hiring and retaining personnel? And I think, we can hear over and over again this manual work. And I think to your whole point, Nick, right? Doing manual work isn't as rewarding. It can be very tedious. It can actually be boring, right? And those issues will remain if you keep manual, if you don't put technology in place. And hiring then becomes a challenge for the back office, for the finance function. We've all heard the Great Resignation, or whatever, this particular term that talks about people leaving their jobs in droves and being unsatisfied with the way things are currently, either at their work and the work that they're doing, or the situations they have at the offices, right? And I think that really, it's thrown a wrench into the hiring plans that were happening in 2020 and 21, and even into 22. But the statistics that we're seeing is that more than half of the finance teams were able to fill open positions within 3 months. I think that's pretty good. But almost 30% said it took up to half a year to fill an open position. And there was 6% that said they were unable to fill open positions at all. Yeah.
Wow, that to me is 6% of people just gave up. All right, take down the job posting. We can't find somebody to do that role. And I guess that probably falls on the shoulders of their coworkers, that someone else has to do that job or continue to do that job. What do they say is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. This is one where I would argue that instead of throwing bodies at the problem, maybe we think about things a little bit differently. Why don't we apply some technology to these problems? And instead of having a job posting that's open for a year and not being able to fill it, why don't we think about solving that a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. And thus embrace that automation, and don't risk the stagnating, right? So being stuck in the same place over and over again. So implementing tech.
Yeah,
Seems on the agenda.
yeah. Yeah, so Elaine, this is like so far I'm getting a little bit depressed, like seeing these statistics. Like, can you give me some reason to be optimistic about the future based on the data that you saw in the survey?
Yes, so there is hope. Okay, it's not all bleak news for the finance back office. And, when we asked what technology respondents were planning on implementing in the next 6 months to a year, so a relatively close agenda, they reported that the leader of the pack was, and this is about a fifth of those surveyed said that the area of focus was going to be analytics and reporting. And that was followed closely by cash performance management and forecasting technologies. So I think these both harken back to what you were talking about earlier, Nick, with the CFO, and where do they want to have that visibility and transparency, and how do you get that through automation?
Yeah, back to the nautical analogy. If you're steering the ship, you need to know where's our current position, where are we at right now, and what is our course and speed in our direction. So, again, that having that analytics and reporting, bravo. I think that's great. That's awesome. Cash performance and cash management and forecasting, that's great. FP&A people have been the beneficiaries of a lot of technology, and there's a lot of great tools that are out there for that. But the rest of the pack, from accounts receivable variance, automated vendor invoice scanning, all those other like lower blocks in this graph, those people all need help. And so I think that what we're on is the cusp of a technology revolution that is going to allow some of those folks that have been left behind by finance technology to be the beneficiaries of that going forward.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And then also, I think, interestingly enough, we also asked what the top priorities for finance back office would be in the next year. And when looking at these 2022 corporate finance priorities, even though I would say just under half of the finance, and this goes back to one of our first questions, right? They had basic levels of automation. More than half the respondents said they're focusing on process improvements and investing in new technologies to improve processes. I mean, those were the top two priorities for the finance back office. I think that both of those things, improving processes and investing in new technologies, those are like table stakes, right? So these finance professionals they really do want to implement things like artificial intelligence. And that's a surefire way to start on a solid automation journey for the finance office. I think that you got finance teams, the ones who haven't automated, right? That percentage that had no automation at all, they're going to be the slowest in the adoption race. And I think they're going to get left behind. But others who have started to implement and incorporate technology, they're going to gain the competitive advantage. And they're going to be the ones who are going to move forward and see the success for their teams and for their organizations.
What jumps out at me on the slide, Elaine, this question is the first three bullets about process improvements, technology, and visibility are all kind of around the same themes that we talked about. But the next three are all around human capital, hiring talent, training people, replacing talent. So if you think about those three, that 9.8, the 7.7, and 6.5, kind of bucket those together in a people bucket. Like, how do I get people, hire them, make them effective, keep them happy so I don't have to retrain them or replace them? That itself, is a trend that we should not ignore. And we should think about, I speak with CFOs all the time. And one of the things I in our CFO Corner video series, I sometimes ask the question, what's it like to hire people these days? And I spoke with a gentleman not too long ago who's the CFO of a company, and he said, well, hiring these kids out of school is difficult. Number one, they don't want to do data entry, and so they don't want to do the jobs their parents did. Right. They don't want to make sure that the two columns in the spreadsheet match and they add up. They don't want to make sure things tick and tie. They want technology to do that for them. And when you say, like, you got to do this manually, they're looking at you like you have two heads. These are people that grew up with the internet. They grew up with technology. And the third thing this gentleman said was they certainly don't want to call people on the phone and ask them for money. So I think that the technology and staff retention and morale, they do go hand in hand. And so if you provide the right tools for people to do their job and be effective at, take away the parts that they don't want to do or they're not good at, give them things they like to do and they are good at and they feel rewarded and fulfilled, then it helps the organization and it also helps the employee.
Yeah, I think that is all excellent points. And so let's talk about from a practical perspective, right? So we can present all this data in the world, right? Information to show what the state of the finance back office is. But if you don't provide a little bit of a direction for people to go in, then how do you move forward? I think that's one of the things people say, I don't know how to get started. What do I need to do? And so we've put together a few practical next steps that we would recommend. If you are a finance team member or you're leading your finance organization and you want to put automation in place, there's a few things that we would recommend that you do. I mean, to get started on your automation journey, you need to really decide and focus on these areas. So first, I would say it's to cloud or not to cloud, right? This concept of if you're on premise today, you really need to consider moving to the cloud first. I think it's sort of a no longer an if thing, but a when, because the leaving things on premises is going to, you just don't get all the benefits of software as a service, where updates and releases and the latest technology and information get embedded in that technology over time. And the onus of updates are on the vendor, not on you and your IT teams. So moving to the cloud, super important. I think it's also looking at traditional versus innovative architecture, right? So you want to identify a cloud-based financial management system that embraces innovative technology. And you want to make sure it's easy to implement. You don't want to just implement old technology like OCR or even RPA nowadays. There is technology that's even more advanced, that's intuitive, easy to implement, and you can quickly have your teams leverage that technology and get the advantages that they need to just do a better job at their functions. Then there's also this concept of lift and shift versus transformation, right? You really want to conduct an audit of your back office processes, understand the day-to-day activities, look at it across the back office, right? Determine what could and what should be transformed. Don't just automate the current process. You've got to really understand your outcomes, and you really want to understand what is it you're trying to achieve. And then you put that together in a plan and execute the automation around that plan. I think we touched on this, right? The retention of the current people that you have is super important, right? You can't just let the whole team go if you're putting technology in place. You need that experience and knowledge that older members or more senior team members have. And that can be a huge benefit for those who are just coming into these kinds of jobs, right? So automation opens up these new opportunities for financial professionals and accounting teams to contribute to business strategy rather than just simply performing data input and output. So make a plan for how you're going to hire tech savvy people and how you're going to retrain your current employees. And then I think lastly, I would say, you want to capitalize on the ARPA opportunity, right? Automation in the finance office translates to dollar figures. Dollar figures, bottom line, that's where organizations grow, expand, and see success. If you just think of reducing days sales outstanding by just a day or two, that's going to translate into additional cash flow, right? Then that's going to allow businesses to reinvest that money into new business opportunities and to identify ways to continue to be successful and grow as an organization. Well,
that's excellent. Why don't we take it home here, and then we can open it up for some Q&A live. Please put your questions in the chat, if you will. I've answered a few of them online, but we'll elaborate on those when we get to the Q&A section. So Elaine, why don't you take us home?
Yeah, so let's talk about the key takeaways. The overarching themes that we're seeing as we've gone through the results from the survey, our third annual State of Automation, right? So the first one, I'd say that many of the challenges, right? Things like the repetitive work, the manual tasks, the repeated follow-up, all that can be resolved by implementing automation. Overcome blockers, such as clerical and administrative work, right? That can be automated, and that's going to help drive things like standardization and accuracy across the finance function. When you automate repetitive tasks, now this will allow your teams to do more dynamic data aggregation, right? Extracting and transformation of that data. And it's going to provide a really enriched environment. And that's going to give you greater visibility and collaboration among your teams and your functions. Nick?
And the key benefits such as transparency, efficiency, and accuracy delivered through automation will recover thousands of hours annually in the back office.
Yeah, and I could not underscore that enough. Thousands of hours that you could earn back for your teams to do more value-added type of work. Okay, and I think next one, transform finance by using the latest and most innovative technology. Cloud data operations, right? Machine learning. Nick talked about natural language processing and natural language understanding. Things like computer vision. All of this is going to help improve cash performance. It's going to drive greater margins for your organization. And it's also going to help you achieve the greatest impact for the quickest return on that investment. That's going to help you mitigate risk and fraud, and having that data that's going to be available for analysis and insights is going to accelerate the way you make decisions, and you're going to make smarter, quicker, and more precise decisions. And that's also going to just benefit your organization across the finance team.
Yeah, and then also get started with some practical next steps, as Elaine just previously laid out on the previous slide. Conduct a good and thorough vendor evaluation, and have a thorough change management plan so that you understand what the before state is and what the after state will be, and create a plan to get from point A to point B. So, Elaine?
I would say the pace of business that we're seeing today, right? It demands faster and therefore shorter cycle times. And that requires the finance function to operate with greater agility. Because of this pace, because of the amount of data, because of all these different processes we're seeing, the standardization has got to be put in place. And the work that's being done, the work that the people can concentrate on, you've got to really simplify how that work is being executed, right? You want to create more time for your teams to focus on analysis and strategy. And that's the role that automation can play. Because underpinning all of this requires that the workforce shifts, right? And it has to embrace this new way of working in order to bring about this greater efficiencies. So now,
before we move into the Q&A, so there was a couple of things that came in, and I've answered a few of them through the chat already. Yes, you will receive a copy of these slides after the webinar is completed. Everyone on this webinar will also receive an advanced copy of the 2022 survey of automation in the finance office. So you'll not only get these slides, but you'll get the report that Elaine pulled those stats out of. You'll also receive, third, the replay of this webinar, so you can listen to it at your leisure. You can listen to it again, the great banter between Elaine and Nick, and the wonderful facts that we've shared with you today. There was another question that I'd like to address. Somebody said, is there one solution that encompasses all these things across all these areas? I wish the answer was yes, but today we live in what I would call a best of breed environment. So there are really, really good solutions out there for accounts payable automation. There are really, really good accounts receivable automation vendors. They are very sophisticated and great companies that do a general ledger or ERP or accounting software in the cloud. I won't mention any of them by name, but you can do some research. What we at Auditoria do, what we do is we fill in that last mile. So, this is not a sales pitch, but understanding what we at Auditoria do, we connect your systems of record and your shared inboxes, your mailbox, to manage and streamline the communication between your company, your accounts payable, your accounts receivable teams, and your external parties, whether they're vendors, customers, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, all that back and forth that we talked about that's very inefficient, we handle that for you. And so we've created some very sophisticated technology that's powered by artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language understanding, natural language processing, and computer vision to read and understand documents. And our smart bots, which you can see are illustrated, those cute little guys that look like WALL-E, they handle all those things for you while you sleep. So if you think about the communication between your department and the rest of the organization or outside, that's what the bots do. Elaine, do you want to provide a little more color commentary on what we do?
Yeah, I mean, really the automation, and we talked about Auditoria is among many of the advanced software that's available out there, but it really is to make organizations more efficient and competitive by accelerating key finance processes. That's going to increase your business visibility. It's going to improve things like compliance. And we do it using leading edge artificial intelligence and machine learning. Listed here are some of the things that our smart bots can do, but there is a ton of technologies that's out there that is available for teams to be able to sort of implement certain parts of their technology stack, put a technology stack in place. So.
Yeah, so if you are interested in learning more and seeing a no pressure, no hassle live demo, please either reach out to me, reach out to Elaine, indicate in the chat, raise your hand, whatever you like to do, and we'd be happy to walk you through some of the ways that Auditoria can help you solve your back office challenges.
I think I just saw another question come in, Nick, that we might want to address.
Mhm.
The question was, what are some of the requirements when evaluating an automation solution? So what would you put together in terms of an evaluation? Maybe what are some of the points that you might come across?
Well, I'll start off, and if I forget any, then you just jump in there and bail me out. But number one, I think ease of integration. So to make sure that your current systems can be easily connected to other systems. In order to do that, typically you'd want to have a cloud-based accounting system. So look for a SaaS application that's easy to integrate, that is cloud-based. You don't have to manage any kind of on-premise servers or anything like that. And then I think having an intuitive interface where you don't have to have somebody with an advanced programming degree to use this thing. I think that intuitive interface would also be something I would look out for. Other things, Elaine?
Yeah, I think you want to make sure you have software that's going to scale with your organization and expand as you grow. So make sure that it's the kind of software that's flexible and it has long-term scalability. I think another thing you might want to look at is how long does it take to implement? There is some technology out there that it could take years to put in place. And you think about some of these really big ERP systems that have aspects of automation in them, but it takes a long time to put them in place. You want to look for something that's going to be quickly put in place so that you can take whatever you invested in that technology and have that turn around quickly so that you are seeing those the savings for your organization and you're seeing the technology and the automation helping your teams in the immediacy and sort of like as a gain that you get right away.
Yeah,
And then I
so-
think, go ahead.
I was going to say, what about the projected ROI? I mean, if you can choose any given vendor, and there's many great ones that are out there, but shouldn't you have a sense for like what is the return on this going to be? If I spend $1 here, am I going to get $3 worth of savings back?
Right, exactly. So you really have to look at, okay, what is the cost of putting this technology in place versus, let's say, something like full-time equivalents that you can save because you don't have to hire another person. So that kind of ROI is definitely something you should evaluate and you should look into in terms of cost savings versus implementation versus the number of FTEs you can either reallocate to other tasks and other work that can be done or allow your team to grow without adding headcount in that particular area. And then I think one last thing I would say, Nick, in terms of requirements when you're evaluating is configuration versus customization. You want to have software that can easily turn on and off features and benefits and functionality and not have to be built for very specific customization for your organization. Now, having said that, every organization is going to have things that they do in a very specific way. So you kind of build that into a blueprint and you build that into your business case and you build that into the way that you design. But you want to look for technology that has more things that can be turned on and off through configuration versus it has to be built with specific custom code or it has to be built in a way that requires additional time, energy, and resources.
Well, so let me ask you this question, Elaine. Let's say I'm a company and I like what you said and everything, but I've got an in-house development team and I want to build this myself. Why couldn't I just build it myself?
Well, we get that question a lot. And I think what happens is a lot of times finance organizations, those types of projects do not get the attention or they do not get the funding, right? The budget dollars that happen within an organization. And I also think what happens is when you try to do it yourself, why would you take on something when you can actually have a company that dedicated all their time, energy, and resources to investing in technology, and then you just take advantage of their expertise and their technology instead of having your IT teams build it themselves, right? A lot of even large organizations are turning to more of these software companies to kind of as an acquisition or to merge with them to be able to offer this advanced technology like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think that, if you want your IT, by the time they put together the specs to build the most rudimentary part of what you're trying to automate, technology's already changed. And what's available out there is already, it's out of date and needs to be updated. And your IT team do not have time to continuously update that kind of work. That's what teams and who are dedicated at a software company will do 24 hours a day, 4 days, all week long. That's what they
Yeah.
touch it on, the next
Yeah.
release.
Yeah, I love that answer. I love that answer. I sometimes think of it as like, how many of us build our own cars versus going to the car lot and buying one, right?
Yeah.
Because if you build your own car, guess what? Okay, so you've got one customer and it's you, and you have to like maintain this thing. And like, there's a reason why we go to the car dealer and we buy a car and we take it there for service, because that's what they do. They see
Yeah.
hundreds of Volvos a day, or hundreds of Volkswagens, or Lexuses, or whatever, Teslas. And so I personally don't want to be a used car salesman, and I don't want to be a mechanic. So I do that. So I think people sometimes, when they have these organizations within their firm, that they want to build it themselves, but I think that's always a fool's errand.
Yeah, I would
Any
agree.
more questions? Do we have any more time for questions, Elaine?
I'm looking to see what else is out there. Oh, one more just came in. I think it said, what are some of the qualities to look for in evaluating a technology vendor? So what would you want to have in a technology vendor? The one I can think of right away off the top of my head is, we always think about this in terms of, you want a company that's not just going to be a vendor, but is going to be a partner, right? That's going to work with you every step of the way to understand your challenges, to understand your current processes, and to work together with you to build a better future and a future state for you and your finance team. So you want to look for a technology vendor that really is going to be a partner, rather than just, here's your software, good luck implementing it, and then see you later, on to the next sale. So make sure you look for a partner. Nick,
Yeah.
your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And the obvious one is, you want a company that's technologically savvy. They've got industry expertise, and they've got knowledge. They've got subject matter experts for several functional areas. And by the way, I would make the argument that there's not one area of expertise within finance and accounting, but there are probably like 5 or 10. We talked about AP, we talked about AR, we talked about FP&A, a lot of acronyms. We've got treasury, you've got tax. There's a lot of different functional areas within finance that, like, the average person is not an expert in all those things. So find a vendor who has the industry expertise and knowledge for your functional areas and your use cases. And then, as you said, Elaine, I'll underscore it even more. Not just the technology, because there's a lot of great technology out there, but somebody who's a partner and who's willing to work with you, understand your needs, and help you solve those problems. Yeah. So I think that might be all the time we have today. On behalf of Elaine and the rest of the team here at Auditoria, I'd like to thank everyone for taking your valuable time out of the day to spend some time with us on our webinar today. Elaine, you want to say goodbye?
Yeah, and I want to say just some great, interesting information and results that we got from the report. And as Nick told you earlier, we're going to be sending out a copy of the report. So the full-fledged 20-page report will become available for you. We'll send it as we'll also send a copy of the slides and the opportunity to watch on demand. So for future casts. So thank you for coming out today, and thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, everyone.